Good morning, everybody. I'd like to warmly welcome you all to today's session. My name is Judy Cronin and I chair the Cork Healthy City Steering Group, and I work closely with Denise Cahill, Cork Healthy Cities Coordinator. And we're absolutely delighted to be involved with UCC Community Week and to officially launch today's event discussing healthy cities, the future for public health. So we have wonderful esteemed speakers joining us this morning and creative artists. And so we're in for a very special session, and we ask you all really to actively use the chat box, which will be monitored throughout the session. So please keep all your questions flowing in. And I'm going to hand you over now to Sarah Burke from Trinity College, who's going to chair this morning's session. So enjoy and please keep sending your questions in. So over to you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Judy, and good morning, everybody. And thanks to Denise and Ivan for asking me to chair this online keynote event on the future of public health. And this is part of loads of events that are happening in UCC as part of the Healthy Community Week. And I think it's happening in the context, today's session, in the context of the Cork Healthy Cities Action Plan, which was published in the last year. As Judy said, please use the chat box to post comments, to have a conversation with each other, and to ask questions to the panel members. First up, we have Sive Goodwin. Sive is the UCC Quercus Creative and Performing Arts Scholar, and Sive is going to start this morning by reciting a poem. So over to you, Sive.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm going to be reading a poem. It's called Hedology. Just as a little bit of background, hedology is the study of pathways, and it's a term kind of used across disciplines, I suppose, in geography, obviously, like with physical pathways, and also in neuroscience for interconnected like brain cells, and in philosophy as well. So yeah, here we go. I think it's something interesting to think about in the context of cities, pathways. Hedology. We break bread with each other early in the morning, emerging wrinkled and harsh at first. Under the flickering blue of the kitchen light bulb, we swell, gentle with the spreading of butter on toast, tired and cold but gilded by honeycomb hexagons. Steam from our tea fogs the future, and there is no wicker basket system of tidiness in our kitchen, but the chaos is comforting as I push pathways through piles of gentle debris. We leave to go our separate ways, slip into ritual as we shuffle through hodological space, those preferred paths we take that serve as a compromise of different domains. The ancient and known factors our commute must take into consideration, consider security, dark mornings leaving you to cling like a moth to the street lamps, consider minimal work, unspooling shortcuts like neurons from memories passed down, consider maximum experience. Wherever you step, you can hear the city chatter, millions of voices like wasps on the wind. The city hums like a hive and doesn't wait for the dawn. She knows our sound and knows our call, and replies to my prayers are always scratched in clay cursive on the back of the bus seat, in the electric hum from the street lights. And if you don't like the music, keep walking. Because tonight we are stained digital beneath flashing lights. Notice how here the buskers sing in time with the sirens and traffic lights and thousands of thrumming footsteps. And although the grass may be greener on the other side, these alleyways have been adorned with so much graffiti it feels like a forest. Spray painted sonnets. The city knows that we have outgrown the old gods and sculpted our own from skeleton prose and cement. We watch from the rooftops as the sun sets, scrolling amber across the skyline, all of us in quiet collaboration. Thank you.
Fantastic, Sive. Really beautiful way to start. So thank you so much for that. And normally I'd say Martin McKee has no trouble following any act, but actually, Sive, I think you've that's a pretty hard act to follow. Martin, to those of you who don't know him, and I suspect most of you do, is really a legend in public health. And the word legend is overused in an Irish context, but I think it's an appropriate word for Martin. He comes from Northern Ireland. He's a public health champion, not just on the island of Ireland. We hear him regularly on our airwaves throughout the pandemic, but also at European and global levels. I'll let you read his bio because I'd be here all day if I went into the detail of it, but he's Professor of European Public Health at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. He's the Research Director at the European Observatory in Health Systems and Policies, and probably most relevant today, he has chaired the Scientific Advisory Board of the Pan-European Commission on Health and Sustainable Development, reporting to the WHO in Europe. So Martin, over to you on the future of public health.
Great, thank you very much indeed. And I think that I pre-recorded the talk simply because I was putting some pictures into it, and I think that you're about to show it. Is that right, David? Good morning, and can I start by thanking you for inviting me to talk at the conference today. As some of you know, I was the external examiner at Cork some years ago, and I've always enjoyed my visits there. As a child, we often went to Skibbereen and to Baltimore, and in turn we took our children to Oyster Haven every second year for many years. So it's with real regret that I'm not able to join you in person. Well, you've asked me to talk about the international pandemic scene. Where to start? We're in the middle of a global pandemic. We're still struggling with a virus that pays no respect to international borders. The problem is international, and so must be the solution. Well, over the last year, I've been working with colleagues to try to find out what that solution might be. I was privileged to be invited by Hans Kluge, the WHO Regional Director for Europe, to join the Pan-European Commission on Health and Sustainable Development. The commission was chaired by Mario Monti, the former Italian Prime Minister and European Commissioner. And I was one of the few people from outside the health community to be on it. I think the decision to look outside the traditional health community was a really good one. It meant we had to move away from what we usually do, which is preaching to the choir. We had 2 former prime ministers, 3 former presidents, people from central banks in the financial sector and from food and agriculture, among others. Several of them had considerable experience in dealing with an earlier crisis, the global financial crisis in 2008. Now, as well as being a commissioner, I chaired the Scientific Advisory Board, bringing together colleagues with a wealth of expertise from across Europe. And this meant that I had the task of preparing the evidence review that underpinned the work of the Commission. It is on the WHO Euro website, and I do hope that you will have a chance to look at it, as, if you will forgive my modesty, something I'm rather pleased about. And it is very much the basis for what I'm going to be talking about now. So what did we talk about in the Commission? Well, we started off by trying to work out what went wrong. We were spoilt for choice. We know that Europe was hit particularly hard in the pandemic. Despite having some of the greatest scientific expertise anywhere in the world, we got so much wrong, particularly in the country that I live in, as has been revealed in a major report out a few days ago. Well, the analogy that I've used is that it's like being in ships in a storm. Ships going through a storm looking for the calm water on the other side need captains who understand the sea and the weather. And that requires at least a basic grasp of the laws of physics. We want those captains to be on the bridge of the ships and not somewhere else, trying to sort out, for example, their departure from the Seamen's Union or their complex personal life. And you'll sense from these comments that the United Kingdom and the United States were particularly unfortunate in the political leaders imposed at the time. And that alone provides much of the explanation for why both countries did so badly. But we also need to have crews on the ships. We need enough people with the right training and the ability to work together as a team. The middle of a storm is not the best time to go to an outsourcing company like Serco, for example, to see if they have anybody who's hanging around looking for work, regardless of whether they have any qualifications. And we need ships that are seaworthy. We don't want people falling through holes in the deck in the same way that we don't want the growing number of people living precarious existences within our societies to be falling through the gaps in the social safety nets that we have weakened by a decade of austerity. Well, we then started to think about how the world would be different after the pandemic. There are lots and lots of changes looming. First, we've got the health legacy of the pandemic. Many of our countries have large amounts of unmet need. We and others have documented the steep decline in people seeking and obtaining necessary health care. There are many estimates of the high burden of cancer that will arise because of lesions that were not identified early enough. And then there is long COVID. We still know far too little about this virus, but we do know that large numbers of people will be left with the consequences of having been infected, perhaps for many years. But there are other changes. Will we ever go back to working the way that we did? Some of you who know me will know that I used to do an incredible amount of travel, and typically I would be on planes several times a week. I once calculated that I spent between 120 and 150 nights in hotels every year. Well, I certainly have no intention of going back to that lifestyle. But we've also learned to work on Zoom. So is there a future for the office? We need to find some ways of interacting in person, but staring at a computer screen in a crowded room is probably not the best way of doing that. And will people want to go back to the old ways of working? Some of them in London, where I live, commuting for hours every day. It may not happen in Cork, but it happens in many other parts of the world. So there's an awful lot to think about. Well, having looked at the past and at the future, we then tried to think what needed to change in our approach to health. And the first thing that we did was to develop a new conceptual framework to understand health in the 21st century. In the middle, we put what we call One Health. And this is the place where the health of humans, animals, and the natural environment all come together. Now, this was where SARS-CoV-2 originated, almost certainly jumping from bats to humans. And this is where one of the other major threats to our survival has arisen, antimicrobial resistance. But it's not just infectious diseases that have their origins here at this intersection. Our diet is a major determinant of many of the non-communicable diseases we experience. The physical environment impacts on our mental health. So this position in the middle at the interaction of these three elements is a really complex place, and we need to understand it much better. Well, beyond that, there are a lot of things that can make our health better or can make them worse. The things that make it better include the ones that we've known about ever since the Ottawa Charter: peace, shelter, food. But there are new ones, like social networks and digital access and access to justice. Then there are things that harm our health, like pollution, food insecurity, the gig economy, and, of course, cyber attacks, something that you have experienced in Ireland and we did previously with the wannabe virus, and crime and corruption. And, of course, corruption in procurement is something that has loomed very large, certainly in the United Kingdom and in many other countries. And of course, all of these are influenced by the health of our planet. Now, when we look at the planet, there are things that are within our control, such as global warming and loss of biodiversity, but there are also things that are not, like an asteroid impact. So the challenge that we have to minimize the risk of diseases occurring in the first place and to create the conditions that promote health, while at the same time reducing those things that increase disease. Now, if we're going to do this, we need concerted action at every level. And here, cities and the work that you do has a particularly important role to play. City planners can do much to shape the physical environment. I know this is something that you've been thinking a lot about in Cork. So how do we make them fit for the 21st century? How do we design our cities in ways that reduce the harm that we do to our planet? How do we create inclusive societies? How do we build social capital? How do we create the venues for people to come together? How do we make sure that people are not retreating behind their walled communities? Because it's that social capital that is so important for preserving health. And how can we give people the security that is a prerequisite for them thinking positively about their own futures? Now, I'm sure that you've thought a huge amount about making the necessary changes. And as you listen to me, you'll say, well, it's all right for him saying what needs to be done. It's much more difficult for us, for you, who are actually trying to do it. And of course, you are right. So we've been thinking a lot about how we can make it easier for you to do the right thing. So first, we looked at what we need to do if we're to heal the fractures that have done so much damage to our societies. We felt that at an international level, a good thing would be to create internationally comparable information systems that allow you to compare the inequalities that you see around you with what is happening elsewhere. Maybe you have the answers. Maybe you have narrowed the inequality gap. In that case, others can learn from you. Or maybe others have been more successful, in which case you can learn from them. But if the scale and the nature of the inequalities is invisible, then you will never know. And of course, as Karl Marx famously said, it's not enough for the philosophers or the epidemiologists simply to describe the world. The task is to change it. So we need to draw on a repository of evidence about what works and what does not work to support those who lead impoverished and precarious lives. And above all, we need to tackle the problem of, let's call it, colour blindness. If you don't count minority populations among us, you will never understand their disadvantage. Well, then we need to look at health systems. Health workers, many of you were the heroes of the pandemic, yet like the soldiers in the First World War, they were often lions led by donkeys. Here in England, we went out once a week to clap for them. But once the cases started to drop, somehow it became too difficult to pay them properly, to provide them with decent conditions at work. So we really need to invest in our health workers. But it isn't just a matter of more money. We need to find new ways of working. We need to look seriously at task shifting and the distribution of responsibilities that go with it. We need to find better ways of working in teams, and we need to build links between health and social care. And we need to look at those countries that are doing this well, and we need to learn the lessons from them, which is just what we do in the European Observatory on Health Systems and Policies, where I'm research director, and where we've been writing about these issues and conducting policy dialogues, including in Ireland, for many years. Innovation has been one of the success stories of the pandemic. We went from nowhere to create vaccines and tests in a remarkably short time. The recovery trial was a triumph, helping us to understand what works and, as importantly, what didn't work. But all too often in medical innovation, we've been focusing on creating new Me Too drugs, things that add little to the sum of human welfare. We need new partnerships between the public and the private sectors, in which each partner shares the risk and shares the benefits. We can't go on with the existing model where the public bear all the risks and the private sector reaps all the benefits. We need innovation with a purpose. So what do we need to do to make this happen? Well, perhaps the most important thing is to create an environment that supports investment in health. Now, almost 20 years ago, we and others made the case that healthier populations are more productive. Healthier people are more likely to participate in the labour force, to work more hours every week and to stay in the labour force until they're older. But sadly, we need to relearn those lessons. We need to change our accounting systems in ways that value investment in health. And we can do this so that we're not just looking on them as a cost. We need to include health in economic forecasts, recognizing that poor health is a driver of economic decline. And if governments are failing to invest in health, then they will be doing damage to their economies. And we're pushing at an open door. The international financial institutions with whom we've been talking, ones like the IMF, get this message. They and others now understand the value and the importance of investing in global public goods. Health, they know, is indeed wealth. Now we need new systems of health governance at a global level too. We didn't have a financial crisis at the onset of the pandemic. We could easily have done so. But we've asked ourselves, why not? Why did we not have that crisis? And perhaps the most important reason was that after the global financial crisis, the G20 put in place something called the Financial Stability Board. Now, this board made sure that the central banks had adequate liquidity if there should be a crisis. They made sure they had systems in place to stress test the banking sector. And there were mutual support arrangements for the central banks in different countries. And it worked. Now, we were really fortunate on our commission to have one of the architects of this system, Lord Jim O'Neill, as one of the commissioners. So we have proposed a global health board that will have the same role, that will look at national health systems and make sure that they're fit for purpose, and will link those assessments to the money, with finance ministers playing a key role in the G20, but going beyond the G20 to include the other countries, just as the Financial Stability Board did. Now, I think we all realize that the international health regulations were less than adequate during the pandemic. They've only been revised 15 years ago, but our current mechanisms are simply not up to the job. And for that reason, we're also proposing a new pandemic treaty. Now, to coin a cliche, no one is safe until everybody is safe, and we will not escape from this pandemic until we've vaccinated the world. And this means that we need a proper global pandemic vaccine policy that makes this possible. So we've also put out proposals for how this can be done, including patent waivers and transfer of trade secrets that's necessary to scale up production to the level that is needed. Now, this is a really ambitious agenda. But by getting the right people on the commission, people who have the key global players on speed dial, we have every reason to be hopeful. Many of the recommendations that were featured in the recent health minister's statement at the G20 meeting in Rome came from our report. And there's widespread support from them in the European capitals, and notably in Washington, where Hans Kluge had some very productive meetings recently. Now, another cliche is to never waste a crisis, and I hope I've shown that we, at least on the Commission, did not waste this one. It was a lot of work to pull it all together, but we're hopeful that what we have done will actually make a difference. When you asked me to talk about the international scene, well, you did ask me to talk about the international scene, but I hope that I've been able to link it to the incredibly valuable work that you do at the city level. So I would simply leave you with the observation that we all live together on this small and ultimately insignificant planet. We can work together to promote the health of everyone, or we can retreat behind our national borders. If we've learnt anything from the past 2 years, it must surely be that the second course, retreating behind our borders, will only lead to disaster. Dag Hammarskjöld, former Secretary General of the United Nations, said that the role of the United Nations was not to take us to heaven, but was to save us from hell. But as individuals working in cities across the world, I think we can do better than that. And I think that by your efforts and working together in cities, coming together on our small and insignificant planet, you can really make a difference. So I hope that this provides some encouragement. I hope that it indicates that at the international level, there is support for what you're doing. And thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Martin, for a really thought-provoking speech. And I hope we come back to many of the threads in that in our discussion and plenary. And I'd encourage those participating to put difficult questions. I have a few myself for Martin for the session at the end. Okay, next up we have Professor Ivan Perry, who I assume needs little introduction to you either. Ivan is currently Professor of Public Health in UCC and the Dean of the School of Public Health there. Ivan's an epidemiologist whose work has changed how blood pressure is monitored in pregnancy. He has changed our understanding of suicide and self-harm, and also the interrelationship between type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. I had the privilege of Ivan teaching me epidemiology on one of the PhD program I did 13 years ago, exactly this time, October, 13 years ago, Ivan. And certainly I was really struck then and continue to be by Ivan's passion for public health and tackling health inequalities. Ivan's very involved in the Cork Healthy Cities project. And Ivan, I look forward to hearing your thoughts on the future of public health.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm delighted to have an opportunity to contribute to this discussion on the future of public health and healthy cities as part of UCC's Community Week. And I'm very grateful to Denise Cahill, Michelle Siren, and members of the Cork Healthy Cities Steering Group for organising this event and for the invitation to take part. It is both an honor and a challenge to share this platform with Denise Cahill and Martin McKee, two inspirational public health leaders. Denise working locally here in Cork, but thinking nationally and globally, and Martin, whose work over several decades has addressed major European and global public health issues, while always remaining rooted in the core determinants of health in communities. As highlighted in the Cork Healthy Cities Action Plan, the future of public health is inextricably linked to healthy cities. The promotion of health, well-being, and human flourishing in urban settings, with an estimated 70% of the world's population expected to live in cities by 2050. What will be the state of public health in general and our cities in particular in 2050? It is tempting to draw on the quote attributed with some uncertainty to Niels Bohr, the Nobel laureate in physics. Prediction is very difficult, especially if it's about the future. The issue, of course, is not primarily about predicting the future. It's about what we need to do to prepare for it. What are the key challenges and priorities now, and how best can we develop the capacity, especially the human capacity, the flexibility, resilience, and the shared sense of purpose that will be needed to respond to the challenges of the future. There is broad agreement on the key public health challenges and priorities that we face here in Cork, nationally and worldwide. Persistent social inequalities in health, well-being, and human flourishing. The ongoing management of the COVID-19 pandemic and our level of preparedness for the next pandemic. The climate crisis and related threats to critical planetary boundaries, and finally the need to reorient our health service towards prevention and primary care, while at the same time maintaining the resources and infrastructure required to care for an aging population. The Cork Healthy Cities Action Plan 2020 to 2030 addresses these core issues, and in its strategy for the next decade, it draws on 6 themes I identified through the Copenhagen consensus of mayors. The 6 P's of people, places, participation, prosperity, peace, and planet. The plan is excellent. It's a tremendous achievement, and I congratulate the Cork Healthy Cities Steering Group on its publication. The plan is coherent, visionary, ambitious, and collaborative, but at the same time grounded insofar as possible in local data and in national and international evidence, with specific actionable targets. The current plan builds on an impressive body of work over the past decade by a small core team led by Denise Cahill, with increasing buy-in from local political representatives, health sector and academic partners, and from local communities. Public health, in its essence, is about creating and sustaining the conditions for a healthy society. It is both an academic discipline and a broadly based and deeply collaborative movement focused on protecting and promoting the health and well-being of populations at the local, national, and global level. To the promotion of health and well-being, I tend to add human flourishing. This is particularly relevant in the context of today's discussion, as a healthy city will seek to develop and invest in a wide range of artistic, cultural, sporting, and play events and amenities that enrich people's lives from childhood to old age. Public health is primarily concerned with system level as opposed to individual level interventions. And one of the things that I particularly like about the Cork Healthy Cities Action Plan is that the word lifestyle does not appear even once in the document. It is long past time for us to move beyond what has been described as the lazy language of lifestyle that emerged towards the latter end of the 20th century and was adopted uncritically by health professionals, policymakers, the media, and the general public. The term lifestyle frames health and well-being at an individual level, effectively blaming individuals for making irrational decisions that are detrimental to their health. As we face a series of interconnected challenges that literally imperil life on Earth and demand profound system level change at government and intergovernmental level, the language of lifestyle perpetuates a disproportionate focus on the need for individuals to make different choices and change their unhealthy lifestyle. To take climate change as an example, it would be good if all of us in Ireland could switch off the lights in our homes and offices when we can, drive an electric car and eat less meat. However, it is clear that for meaningful progress towards reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, we need to stop burning coal and peat in our power stations as quickly as possible. We need to incentivize active and public transport and the transition to electric vehicles in the public and private sector, and we need to develop policies both to promote plant-based diets and we reduce our national beef and dairy herds. It should be noted, of course, that all of these policies have significant additional health benefits that we do not hear enough about. In reflecting briefly on the future of public health and healthy cities, I would like, in the time remaining, to focus on the climate crisis, which of course will exacerbate social inequalities in health and well-being. It will increase our susceptibility to further pandemics, while also placing enormous and potentially unsustainable demands on our health system. In the particular context of healthy cities, I would like to focus on the need for public health to work with other disciplines and groups in the social sciences, arts, and humanities as a catalyst for the shared sense of purpose that will be needed at the city, national, and global level if we are to confront this existential crisis. In his book Future Public Health, published in 2012, Phil Handlin, a public health physician who spent his working life addressing the health and well-being of the people of Glasgow, has argued, drawing on Plato, that in our current efforts to promote the health and well-being of populations, we tend to focus too much on science, the true, at the expense of the beautiful, aesthetics, and the good, ethics. This is not an argument that diminishes the importance of reason and science. Indeed, in the current era of science, then nihilism and shameless propaganda from corporate vested interests on a range of issues, including climate change. We need to defend the values of the Enlightenment. The need to separate, insofar as possible, fact from opinion, and science from ideology. Unfortunately, however, science and reason will not be enough if we are to successfully engage with the climate crisis and with related wicked problems that imperil health, well-being, and sustainability in the 21st century. In the case of climate change, it is clear that the detailed and scientifically rigorous reports from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have not been enough to move hearts and minds on the need for radical change to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. For example, in an Irish Times Ipsos MRBI opinion poll published last week, not one of 9 potential planned or suggested climate action measures was supported by a majority of respondents. It is increasingly clear that if we are to limit the harms from climate change and promote health, well-being, and human flourishing, we need a broadly based movement that is grounded in science, but with the capacity to engage in individuals and communities at the level of the beautiful and the good. Public health needs to be the catalyst at the forefront of a movement that seeks to celebrate and acknowledge the beauty and fragility of our planet, and cultivate a popular narrative and a moral consensus focused on justice, compassion, interconnectedness, and interdependence within and across across generations and with all life on Earth. The notion of a popular narrative or story is critical. The writer and Guardian columnist George Monbiot has highlighted the fact that when we encounter a complex issue and try to understand it, what we generally look for is not a consistent and reliable set of facts, but a consistent and comprehensible story. A string of facts, however well tested, will not correct or dislodge a powerful story. People tend to deny facts that clash with the narrative truth, in inverted commas, established in their minds. The only thing that can displace a story is a story. As Monbiot puts it, those who tell these stories run the world. Alex Evans, a contemporary climate change and development policy analyst who has worked at intergovernmental G8 level, makes a similar point in his book, the myth gap. Evans reminds us that evidence and arguments are much less important than values in determining our approach to social and political issues, and that values are in turn shaped by stories or myths. As humans, we have a deep hunger for grand narratives, stories or myths that explain where we are, how we got here, where we might be trying to get to, and underneath is all who we are. Evans argues that in the context of the climate crisis, we now need an overarching story with a larger us that takes us beyond our national and cultural boundaries, a longer now that shifts our focus from the short-term political cycle to generational time spans, and a different version of the good life based on a model of progress in which growth is less a story of increasing material consumption and more about us finally growing up as a species. In public health, we are increasingly focused on what are described as syndemics. A syndemic describes two or more diseases that synergize to make each other worse and include societal as well as biological drivers. For example, over the past 18 months, COVID-19 infection has occurred in synergy with an array of non-communicable diseases such as heart disease and diabetes, all heavily clustered within social groups linked to patterns of inequality deeply embedded in our societies. Syndemics simply highlight the extent to which in public health, as in life in general, everything is connected to everything else. This is not a novel or an especially profound observation. Unfortunately, however, we are deeply resistant to the notion of our interconnectedness and interdependence with each other and with all life on Earth. What should be a core anchoring value or ethical stance as we confront the climate emergency is widely seen as esoteric, possibly spiritual, and certainly beyond the realm of scientific or public health discourse. This was brought home to me in 2019 when I spent some time in the Department of Nutrition at the Harvard School of Public Health on a short sabbatical. During my stay, I gave a seminar just describing some of our work on nutritional epidemiology, touching on the issue of diet and climate change. My reference in the last slide to the notion of interconnectedness and interdependence led to the assumption that I must be a Buddhist. Whether or not I am a Buddhist is debatable, but I would suggest that in the collective narrative that will carry us forward to 2050 and be beyond, we need to acknowledge the collective greed and delusion that has brought us to the current climate precipice, and the clear need for us to reconnect with nature and expand our circle of moral concern to include animals, plants, and the wider environment. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ivan, for an extremely thoughtful, critical, but also compassionate presentation to us, or talk to us there. I always love listening to Ivan because I always learn a new word and good book list to follow up on after listening to you. So thanks for that, Ivan. And I see the questions coming in, but we'll hold on to them until after we've heard Denise. So the final speaker this morning is Denise, who is probably familiar to you all as the coordinator of the Healthy Cities for Cork City. And Denise also teaches public health in UCC. Denise has a range of health promotion and public health roles over the last 20 years, all of which demonstrate her knowledge, experience, and commitment to promoting health and well-being and tackling health inequalities. And no surprise, I suspect, that in line with Ivan and indeed Martin's input, Her commitment to health and health inequality dovetails with her strong personal and professional interest and commitment to climate justice and environment sustainability. Denise, I suspect you are the main engine behind the new Cork Healthy Cities Action Plan, and over to you now.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to use some slides just to demonstrate some of the work that we're doing in Cork. Thank you to both Martin and Ivan, whose presentations are actually going to dovetail very nicely, I feel, into the work that we're doing here in Cork as a healthy city. We're a WHO healthy city since 2012. And for those of you that aren't aware what that means, it's basically a city who that looks at improving its environment and expanding its resources so that people can support each other in achieving their highest potential. So the city is constantly evolving and responding to what's going on. And I think in the last 2 years, we're particularly aware of how we've had to respond to the current pandemic that we're all experiencing. So it's a process, it's not an outcome, and the designation isn't about, yeah, your job is done, you're a healthy city, no need to do anything else. You're actually signing up to a process of engaging in actions around health, and you're doing that focusing it on the political and social agenda of the city. So it's not about the health services doing health for the city. It's about everybody else actually more than anything. So the emphasis is very much on partnership, and I was delighted to hear reference to that from Martin in his speech, that, you know, the importance of that collaborative partnership approach across agencies, you know, non-traditional partnerships as well, that are key, and we've really had that at the heart of our progress. And these are our partners, and these aren't you know, strange to anybody working, I suppose, in this field of public health, but all of these partners are the key drivers of our agenda. And really, we've spent the last 10 years trying to find a common language and trying to talk, you know, about health in a unified and in an understanding and broad sense. And definitely lifestyle doesn't feature much in our discussions. We very much focus on the upstream approach to public health, and, you know, there's a whole lecture we could give on this, but and the analogy of, you know, the pulling people out of the river or looking upstream and trying to make sure that they don't fall in the first place. And that's kind of where Healthy Cities is based. It's upstream at the bridge, making sure people aren't falling in so that the health services aren't having to pull people out of the river as such. Healthy Cities is very much embedded in the Ottawa Charter, for those of you that have studied health promotion, and, you know, that's a charter that was developed in 1986 by the WHO, and really it's the foundation stone of all of what we do. You know, it's all about that public policy, environmental structures. Personal skills, yes, come into it, but unless there's good, strong community action and a focus on reorientating the health service towards a prevention and health promotion approach, you know, that's really the foundation stone of how we work. The social determinants of health, I've a picture of 3 babies here. You might wonder why, because in the hour that we're here, there's 3 babies are born up in the CUMH here in Cork. And I suppose what will happen for them in the next 5 years is more important than anything else that they will do, or maybe choices that they make in their life. And really, I suppose the social determinants are about, you know, the communities that we live in, the connections that we have, the education that we have opportunities to engage in, whether we have work and good quality working conditions, and how safe we feel, I suppose, in our communities. And I suppose I did want to flag this, you know, this drift that seems to be emerging, and it is emerging here in Ireland as well. And I think we have to be very conscious of that, towards the lifestyle-based approach to health promotion and behaviour, and a focus on individuals, you know, that, you know, when you hear statements like government can't help you to be healthy, that's quite alarming. So the challenge for us in Healthy Cities is to bring all of this theory that I've whistle-stopped you through here in the last few slides to action at local level. And I really was taken with Ivan's comment that, you know, it's public health is an academic discipline, but it's also a collaborative movement. And I'd say that we're at that end of the spectrum. We're at the collaborative movement end of the spectrum, trying to take the academic and the evidence, of which there is a lot. And then, you know, even Martin's presentation on the social determinants, there's a new model, there's new challenges that are out there, always having to be abreast with that and always having to respond at a local level, because it's at local level that change happens and action happens. And we're acutely conscious that, I suppose, that's in our gift, and that's what we're about. So really, it's all about that process and not just the outcomes. So the way that we do work, and I suppose the foundation stone of our work, is our city profile, which I think we're unique, certainly in Ireland, but also I think at a European level, because myself and Judy presented this to the European Healthy Cities partnerships in Europe, and they were quite taken with the approach that we take here in Cork, which is an interagency profile. And the amusing story about this is that when I started as Healthy Cities Coordinator 12 years ago, my first task was to do a health profile for the city. And, you know, I was conscious that health isn't just about disease, because a lot of public health reports do focus on disease and, you know, the level of cancer, the level of cardiovascular disease, diabetes. Of course, that's important. But we also need to start looking at education, and we need to look at employment, and we need to look at the social determinants of health. So I was sitting in that office doing in Cork City Council, doing the city profile, and I went for coffee with someone from the social inclusion unit, and she told me she was doing a city profile as well, the exact same task, and she was 2 desks away from me. And then, of course, when you start talking and realizing and telling people this, you realize also the community sector are doing a city profile based on the census. So Cork is a small city. We all drink coffee together, and we had a conversation and said, you know, we need to come together and develop an interagency profile and develop this common language that I referred to earlier, you know, about health, so that people understand that health isn't about disease. Yes, disease is, you know, the negative outcome of poor health, but that health is about what's going on in the day-to-day life. And that Cork City Council, my favourite line is, Cork City Council has a bigger impact on our health than the HSE as such, because the decisions that are made through planning and development are really key to promoting health. So what we have done is developed an interagency group that do one large city profile for the whole city, and we put the lens of the social determinants on the census data. There's a whole report on our website. I'd invite you to take a look, because it is, as I said, quite innovative in its approach, and we are very committed to it. And I suppose it's our foundation stone for advocating for a social determinants approach to health at city level. These maps, I think, are quite stark, because what they tell us, it's a picture of the old boundary of Cork City. And the dark areas are the areas that have higher levels of. So you can see here that these maps are practically identical, that there's areas of the city that are struggling in terms of, the top left is about unemployment, higher levels of unemployment. The top right is about the highest level of education just being primary level, so we'll say lower levels of education. Bottom left is the percentage of lone parents, and the bottom right is how people rated their health in the census, and the higher rates are the ones where people say it was fair or poor. So you can see there's patterns here emerging, and these patterns aren't always visible because our census is usually presented at a national level and, you know, at a city level. But we in Healthy Cities go down to the electoral district level, and we're very keen to see what's going on in terms of geographic patterns. And what we're seeing here is a picture of inequality. There's also another map that is identical to this, which is the Truth-Tass disadvantage map. So as a result, we because we're a WHO Healthy City, we have an obligation to do a 10-year action plan to be a part of phase 7, which we've just been accepted into in the last few weeks. We're thrilled to have received that, and we're looking forward to hearing from the WHO officially about that. So as Ivan mentioned earlier, the new approach to action planning for healthy cities is the 6 Ps. So we've had to action plan based on all of the evidence at European and I suppose bringing in the national level as much as we possibly can. The 6 Ps of peace, planet, place, people, participation and prosperity. And the way we've decided to do this is we work at 4 levels. Firstly, we profile, which I've just introduced you to very briefly. We profile what's going on, but we profile from a social determinants perspective. But then we collaborate. So we seek collaborations, looking at the profile, looking at what's going on. We are very open for collaboration because, you know, I as an individual or Judy or Aoife, who are all on the team, we can't do this alone. It's all about partnership. We look for good practice and we support good practice. If there's good practice out there, we throw ourselves into it and we support it and we highlight it. And we communicate that as much as we possibly can. And social media has really given us that opportunity more so now. And then you know, when we get our opportunity, such as today, we advocate for this as an approach. We advocate at political level. We have a political representative on our steering group, and where he possibly can, he advocates for this as an approach. So it's not just me, who everybody would expect to advocate, it's all of us advocating for a social determinants approach at all times. So we've many partnerships, and again, I could spend 2 hours telling you about all of these wonderful partnerships that have evolved from Green Spaces for Health, which is very much embedded in nature and very much connected to what Ivan was just talking about. The Playful Paradigm, which was a European project funded by URBACT around bringing play to Cork City, but that has just grown arms and legs, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a second. We've the only food policy council in Ireland, which is about a sustainable and healthy food system. And again, that's at a policy level, but also at an action level and a practical level. We've Psyched, which is a workplace mental health promotion initiative, because we saw that there was a gap in workplace health promotion supports that are out there. And we're also very much connected with the age-friendly cities approach. So in our action plan, which is on our website, corkhealthycities.com, we have aligned all of our actions, and I'm just showing you this slide to say we've aligned every single one of our actions to the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. Obviously, that's a key factor in terms of the actions, and we're very much attached to that. And when we put in our submission, Judy in particular did a huge body of work in terms of our application to the WHO to demonstrate how we're thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals at all stages. So this is an example in terms of people. These are the themes. The bullet points are what the WHO give us. These are the themes that we are supposed to action plan under, because the evidence at European level is that these are the priority areas. So Cork City has taken these themes and it has developed actions around it, and they're all visible in the action plan. A good example in terms of people is some of the work that we've done through that European project on play. You know, we've done a whole range of activities around supporting people, but this is just a sample whistle-stop tour of how our Playful Paradigm, because we had a collaboration in place and because we had a partnership, we were able to respond to the needs of older people and small children during the pandemic through the provision of play packs across the city. Place, which is becoming more and more important in terms of planning and in an urban context. We've done a lot of work with Cork City Council, and we've utilised placemaking as a fantastic tool. It's just fascinating for me because, you know, we talk about community development approaches, and we talk about, you know, supporting environments and the Ottawa Charter, and engineers talk about, you know, designs and infrastructure. And the language that we found that we have in common with planners is placemaking, because placemaking is a community development approach. It's a fantastic way of engaging people. It's a fantastic way of responding to the local need. And through a whole range of placemaking initiatives, the marina, which I'm sure some of you have heard, has become pedestrianised as a result of this work. There's a whole investment in pedestrianisation in Cork City in Cork City Centre now, post-pandemic or post-restrictions of the pandemic. And there's a lot of, I suppose, openness to this as an approach for health and that. Participation, we did a fantastic project with University College Cork and the Glucksman around engaging children through a draw and write technique. Over 2,000 pieces of art that children drew around what they wanted for the future of their city were analysed with the assistance of the Occupational Health Department in UCC, and a report was submitted to the city development plan. So the vision of what children want for the city. This was a very innovative project and has won awards. In terms of prosperity, we support mental health in the workplace, and we look at prosperity in terms of progressive and social progress, not just about a capitalistic or a financial related development. We're looking at the sustainable development goals and ethical investment policies. And then in terms of peace, we've done a whole range of consultations and engagements around climate and public health, and we really see that public health is a fantastic lever for behaviour change around climate change and action. And this is a graphic harvest of one of the seminars that we held. So as a result of this seminar, a load of actions from experts and stakeholders around climate health and climate change and public health went into the climate adaptation strategy for Cork City Council, as well as the Healthy Cities Action Plan. And then in terms of the planet, I've mentioned already the Food Policy Council and the Green Spaces for Health, which is an incredible project in Cork City, transforming public spaces into food growing areas, getting people activated, having an urban beehive. You can see there the Lord Mayor with the bees, developing tree trails and really connecting nature with public health. And I suppose just finally, we're delighted because, you know, the draft city development plan for the first time in a long, you know, in our existence, has put in as one of its top strategic visions that the city will build on Cork City's status as a WHO designated healthy city. That was just a celebration for me once I saw that in the document. And it's not just in the front page, the way the social determinants can go into the front page of some health policies on, you know, a focus on social determinants and then no translation in terms of actions. We're delighted to see that health is interweaved throughout the draft city development plan, and there seems to be a huge commitment here now in Cork and a huge understanding after 10 years of, I suppose, of working as we have been to Cork as a healthy city, and a real understanding of what that's about. So the traditional health action is to work on the individual. When I was in college, it was all about, you know, the food pyramid and eat well and exercise well, get your exercise, don't smoke, don't drink tobacco, or don't drink alcohol, sorry. Healthy city action, I suppose, was about providing an environment in which you as an individual can flourish, as we were mentioning earlier. And now I guess, as Martin outlined in his presentation, it really is about public health and climate action and looking more at a global level. So while we're working at city level, we're thinking globally. Now I'm conscious of time. I did have a video. I'm not going to play it because I don't think we have time. And thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Denise. And I agree, maybe we can weave the video into whatever goes up online, but good to keep our time this morning for the questions. I certainly have lots of questions. There's a few in the chat box, so I think it probably makes sense to start there. But I was struck, Denise, when you were talking in terms of certainly for those of us not in Cork during the pandemic, we've looked with envy at the Cork City's response to the pandemic, and and what you were saying about the development plan, the draft development plan, and the role WHO Healthy Cities is playing. And I suspect that is because of a decade's or more's work in trying to build it in. And for me, it really shows you just the long-termism that's needed to build that into public policy and change. But really interesting and a really good exemplar, along with Belfast, I think, on the island of Ireland, of the impact of the WHO Healthy Cities. Martin, the first question is for you, in terms of the scale of inequalities being invisible, what we can't, if we don't see it, we can't address it. And do you have advice for, at a local level in Cork Healthy Cities, how best to further highlight health inequalities in the city?
Well, I think that what we've heard from Denise about the city profiles, you're already doing that to some extent. I suppose from an international perspective, the challenge now is to have comparable data. That's what we call for in the Monti report. So I think you're well on the way, but the issue is how you can use the network to develop those comparisons and then look at how other, I mean, as I was saying, look at what other people have done to address them. The big challenge that we have everywhere is, I think, ethnicity. We have really failed, and I'm not sure just how much you're doing on that, because I think that's where we have failed right across. The UK is actually one of the few things that we do well. We do capture that, but unfortunately in too many places, partly for historical reasons, because of abuses of the data in the 1930s, we're not doing it. But the difficulty that we have in all of these things and getting the comparisons is that the reasons why we have inequalities vary. And there are some characteristics that individuals have that will make them disadvantaged in some societies and not in others. Like it could be religion, or it could be gender, or it could be all sorts of things. So you need to try and blend that local with the generalizable, and that's a real challenge.
Thanks, Martin. The next question is in relation to anchor institutions providing social value and using assets and resources to benefit the communities. And a particular question, I guess I'll put it to Ivan first, but Denise, you might come in as well in terms of UCC's role as an anchor community and in building healthy communities.
And yeah, no, I think that UCC has a key role, and even this event that we're here this morning, and the collaboration that UCC's involvement in Cork Healthy Cities is one small example of that. But I think as an institution, we really need to look critically at ourselves and say, are we doing enough to be as exemplars of the promotion of health and well-being? Like, for instance, I could be in a lecture talking about social inequalities in health for students, but if I'm not asking the question about the people who are coming in to clean the lecture hall, are they on some short-term contract? Because, for instance, most universities, for instance, in recent years, they have contracted out their basic services. For instance, just to take one example, the catering and the cleaning and so on. So what sorts of terms and conditions are the people in the university who are serving our food and keeping the building clean? And also in terms of public sector procurement in the area of food, which is a topic that I'm interested in. I think the public sector could do a lot more. In terms of the climate, I would be arguing that UCC should look at Cambridge, which has taken beef and lamb off their menus, and that would be hugely powerful and both symbolic and a practically important gesture. So I think I think UCC does make the effort to reach out and be part of the local community, but we could always do more.
Thanks, Ivan. Denise, any thoughts there?
Yeah, this is something that I say a lot, you know. I think, I mean, we're very lucky here in Cork. As I said earlier, it's a small city, so we're able to connect easily. And the approach we've taken is, you know, the expertise is in UCC, and there is knowledge there, and there's talent there that we can tap into, and there's always been a huge openness. Like UCC have been on board from day one. But what I think is really warranted now is the courage to come out and start saying the difficult things. You know, I think in particular around climate change. You know, I've attended many conferences on climate change, and it's experts speaking to experts, researchers speaking to researchers, and there's the echo chambers of expertise that go on. But I think courage to come out and take it on and share it and work at that interagency level, because it's so complex. Somebody needs to start translating the complexity of things to everybody else, because that's where the action is. And I know we've worked with the ERI, the Environmental Research Institute in UCC, with the Greening Our Cities series, which is about that. It's about bringing it to planners, policymakers, you know, directors in Cork City Council, health professionals, community professionals, and again, finding that common language and understanding the way we did and the approach we took with the social determinants. So I think we really have to start looking at practice-based research as well, because there is a lot of research that is, you know, focused in areas that maybe we can't get involved in, or that we're not practically, it's not practically possible. So I'd love to see more of that, and we've certainly engaged in that very, very well with UCC, and we've always welcomed it, but more of it, and courage for academics to step up and step out would be something I'd love to see more of.
Sarah, can I just jump in and say something, pick up on with something Ivan mentioned, which is public procurement. We published a report on public procurement for the European Commission's, you know, I'm on the European Commission's expert panel on investing in health recently. And there's an awful lot that can be done within the directives on public procurement in terms of lifetime costing and so on, and putting in environmental and particularly regional development strategies linked to public procurement. And the Italian regions, the northern Italian regions, Lombardy and some of the others in particular, and some of the German landers like Brandenburg have done quite a lot in this. So I think it's worth looking at.
And even just to make one very simple but practical recent example, we've heard a bit about food insecurity in amongst our students, who many of whom are struggling with high rents and so on. And yet, if you go to the staff restaurant, the sort of basic staple offering for if you're trying to save money is our sausages and chips, you know, which I would have lived on 30 or 40 years ago, or whenever I was in college. But you'd like to think we've learned a thing or two about sausages and chips in the intervening years, but we're still dishing it up for our students.
Maybe you could send a few of the sausages up north, because I gather they're having problems in getting them at the minute.
Indeed.
Somehow or other.
Don't mention
Given
sausage, Martin.
Themselves, but that's another issue.
Okay, a few more questions I'd love to try and get through while we have time. There's a question here from Maeve in relation to, would you suggest anyone with a public health background looking to get involved in a career in healthy cities advance their education in areas such as urban planning certificate or a master's? So just quite practical question there. Anyone?
And again, we actively encourage our BSc undergrads to look at areas like that, and I think that's one of the I suppose advantages of having an undergrad program in public health, because you can send people into areas that impact on the health and well-being of the population, but are not necessarily pure public health in the traditional sense.
Can I just come in there? I also think, and Ivan referenced it in his talk earlier as well, I think the mainstream education and particular health professional education should have public policy modules in them as well, so that when there is a physiotherapist out there, you know, working with the community and sees what's going on, that they have the skills to advocate and that they have the knowledge of where they can go, and I suppose the bigger picture perspective. So while I completely agree, yeah, in terms of your career, you know, broaden it as much as possible, and planning is certainly a fantastic area, or climate or environmental science as well. But I do think it would be fantastic to see more public health infiltration into the broader academic curriculum as well.
Thanks, Denise. There's 3 questions in front of me, and I'm going to just briefly say what each of them are and give each of you 1 minute each to respond, so you can slide, because otherwise we're going to run out of time. So the first one is in relation to healthy cities and the built environment, and whether healthy cities should engage, particularly in relation to the universal design approach. The second one is in relation to, it's specific to Martin, but the others can come in relation to the Monti report with experts from food and banking, if there's example from regulations, impact assessments from other areas that can be transferred to health, such as tobacco, that are useful for climate change. And the third one is there a tough question in relation to, is there a risk that healthy cities could lead to a widening of social inequities, in that more of the measures are likely to be taken up by more privileged groups? Who's going to come in first?
I'd love to come in on that last one, if that's okay.
Okay, go first, Denise.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we were talking about lifestyle drift, and we were talking about behaviours and individuals. A lot of, I suppose, when we developed Cork as a healthy city, we always had this debate of, you know, strategy versus action. You can't influence policy unless you're doing action at some level, and that's what I've learned in the last 10 years. You can talk about health impact assessment, you can talk about health inequalities, but unless you're actually doing something practical. So we've always had to kind of weigh up, you know, how much time do I spend in terms of doing action, and how much time do I spend advocating and trying to influence policy. But what I've learned is action is key. So I think you're right, it's a fantastic question, and it's a question we'd always have at the heart of our discussions before we do anything. It's always about, who are we targeting, who needs this the most, how. And once you go into planning and health promotion with that lens, and when you're thinking broad, you're not thinking about running, you know, there's a movement away then from running workshops on, you know, what you should be eating, to looking at budgeting and looking at shopping and looking at what's available in your local community, and getting communities resourced to provide support, like community garden in niche. That also, not only do they grow, they also cook and they talk, and the men's group talk about mental health as they're cooking. So it's, once you go in with that approach, and once you're aware that there's a chance that you can exacerbate inequalities by just making things available to the privileged few, that you know, I think you can avoid that. So it's a great question to ask, and it's one we always have at the center of our discussion. So thank you.
Ivan, can I get you on next?
Yeah, so perhaps I'll comment on what we can learn from the public health battle with the tobacco industry and so on, and obviously we've learned a lot. I suppose all the fossil fuel industry and the food industry operate from the tobacco industry playbook that emerged in the 60s, in terms of trying to deny the science and undermine the credibility of scientists, and buying influence with governments, and in a way, the only difference is that with the tobacco industry, these these strategies evolved gradually over time, whereas with the fossil fuel, they're all being played out at the same time. So I think we certainly need to ensure that our students and people are aware of the concepts and skills of public health advocacy, but also, I suppose, in relation to climate change, it's fair to say that there's a lot happening at the sort of intergovernment level, with the COP coming up and the IPCC and so on. I suppose what I was trying to get at in my talk is that the sense of urgency hasn't really worked its way down to the ground level, to local communities, and I really see that as our key task in the years to come.
Thanks, Ivan. And last word to you, Martin.
Yeah, I mean, echoing what Ivan said, I think people in public health need to be very familiar with the commercial determinants or corporate determinants of health and the tactics of denialism, which we have seen in spades during the COVID pandemic. And you've had it in Ireland just the way that we've had it here. Both of us, unfortunately, polluting the dialogue in each of our countries. The question about other sectors, yeah, I think it's really important if you're engaged in public health that you read outside your the normal sort of vehicles, and that means reading things like The Economist and the Financial Times in particular. We've been looking a lot at environmental, social and governance, or ESG indicators. Now, there's been a big debate about them in the Financial Times. They've got uses, they've got abuses. You know, one has to be careful. And there can be unintended effects, because one of the things that we have seen is a massive divestment by managed funds from the fossil fuel industry, which has allowed some hedge funds to make big profits recently. So, you know, this is complicated. But I think that we need to be on top of all of these issues. We need to be careful because, on the one hand, people like the tobacco industry, the gambling industry, which I think is the new serious threat to health that either we don't pay enough attention to, junk food and all the others, use the argument of complexity to say that it's all too difficult and we can't do anything. So we need to avoid that. But on the other hand, we do need to understand the nuance and the issues that are involved, because some of the more simplistic solutions may have unintended consequences, but that's not an excuse for failing to act.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I think, like all good discussions, you've raised more questions than have answered, but I think it's a great beginning of a new dialogue. So thanks to Cork Healthy Cities and UCC for facilitating and hosting the event, for Davidas for providing tech support and getting us through smoothly. Much appreciated, Davidas, and to all of you for participating in this event.
And thank you, Sarah, for chairing.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks everybody.
Everyone.
And we're pretty much on time, so we leave it there.
Brilliant.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.